Have you ever heard of a king so shrouded in mystery, like practically begging for his story to be embellished?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, we're diving into the world of Chandragupta Maurya, the guy who founded the mighty Mauryan Empire back in 4th century BC India.
It's remarkable how someone, with such sparse historical documentation can become like a national hero.
Right.
It really speaks volumes about, I think, our human need to kind of create these larger than life figures, even if we got to fill in the gaps a little bit ourselves.
Yeah, it's like a historical game of telephone.
Exactly. Yeah.
But before we get to that, the whole hero-making thing, let's set the stage a little.
Okay.
So imagine India in the 4th century BC. We're not talking about the unified country that we know today, but really a fragmented landscape of, these smaller kingdoms all kind of vying for power. And right in the middle of it all, in the super fertile Ganges Valley, was the big dog, the dominant force, the Nanda Empire, ruling from their strategically vital capital city, Pataliputra.
And you can't overstate the importance of that location. I mean, Pataliputra, which was built, by the way, on the site of modern Patna, was absolutely crucial for controlling trade and resources. I mean, throughout Indian history, empires have fought tooth and nail for this city, and the Nandas were no exception.
So into this world steps Chandragupta Maurya, or rather like emerges from the mist of history. These scattered, almost like mythical accounts. We're talking snippets from Greek and Roman writings, little whispers from Indian religious texts, Buddhist, Jain, Brahmanic, each one kind of offering a unique perspective and maybe potentially its own sets of biases, right? It's like trying to assemble a puzzle where some of the pieces are made of legends and like hearsay.
And that's what makes this deep dive so captivating. It's a challenge to sift through these layers of potential bias and cultural interpretations, maybe even outright fabrications, to get a glimpse of the real Chandragupta.
Right.
We have to be careful not to mistake the myth for the man, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of those glimpses, one source that I think this gives a particularly interesting perspective is Megasthenes. He was a Greek ambassador who actually visited Chandragupta's court.
Oh, wow.
Now, sadly, his book, Indica, is lost to time. But we do have these tantalizing fragments that are quoted by later writers. It's almost like finding like stray pages from a lost travel journal.
It's amazing what survives, right?
Yeah, I know.
So Megasthenes gives us these fascinating details about court life, social structures. He even recounts these like kind of fantastical stories of mouthless people who supposedly lived on smoke. Now, whether those stories are accurate or not is, up for debate. But they definitely give us a sense of how an outsider viewed this powerful Indian empire.
That's really interesting. It's like trying to understand a completely different culture through the eyes of someone who just like stepped off the boat, right?
Right.
It makes you think about how his own background might have colored how he saw Chandragupta's court.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. We always have to consider the source and their potential biases, especially when we're dealing with ancient texts. And it's not just the Greek accounts that offer kind of a fragmented view. Even the Indian sources can't agree on Chandragupta's origin story. So was he a commoner, like plucked from obscurity by a wise advisor named Chanakya who saw his potential? Or did he get the idea to, topple the Nanda Empire from a simple observation, like a mother scolding her children for burning their fingers on hot food?
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing how there's different narratives. I mean, they paint such different pictures.
Right.
But, I mean, they're both compelling in their own way, I think. I mean, the commoner rising to power story speaks to that idea of merit and, like, a hidden potential. While, like, the motherly wisdom tale, that highlights the importance of observation and strategic thinking.
Exactly, yeah. And I think these competing narratives really highlight the deeper cultural values that are at play. They tell us as much about the storytellers as they do about Chandragupta himself. But regardless of where he came from, we know that Chandragupta was an ambitious figure who ultimately took on the established Nanda Empire. And just as he was, consolidating his power, a new challenge appeared on the horizon, the legacy of Alexander the Great.
Yeah, so after Alexander died, his massive empire, got divided up among his generals.
Right.
And one of these generals, Seleucus, he decided to set his sights eastward, leading his armies towards the Indus River.
Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, it's like a clash of titans, right? You got this new ambitious power from India, Chandragupta, facing off against like the remnants of Alexander's war machine.
Right.
It really makes you wonder what must have been going through their minds as those two forces like met on the banks of the Indus.
It's a moment, unfortunately, kind of shrouded in mystery.
Yeah.
The sources we have, they're pretty vague on the actual battle details. Okay.
But we do know that they eventually made a peace treaty,
Okay.
and the terms of this treaty, well, they're remarkable.
What do you mean?
Chandragupta gifted Seleucus 500 war elephants.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
500. Can you imagine the logistics of transporting that many elephants, like, across such vast distances?
Yeah, that's a pretty impressive display of power, for sure.
I mean, I can't even imagine trying to feed that many elephants, let alone move them across a battlefield.
Right.
So what about Seleucus? What did he give up in return for, this elephantine entourage?
Well, he ended up ceding large territories to Chandragupta,
Okay.
areas that cover like parts of what's now Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Wow.
And there's also this speculation that he may have even agreed to a marriage alliance,
Hmm.
to further cement the peace between their empires.
Interesting. So a strategic marriage?
Yeah, possibly.
But I guess the real question is,
Yeah.
what actually happened during that initial clash? Was it like a decisive Indian victory, a stalemate, or maybe some clever negotiation, where both sides kind of saw the benefits of cooperation?
It's fascinating, isn't it, that lack of clarity?
It is.
Because it's in that, in that ambiguity that we see the beginning of Chandragupta's transformation into a national hero.
You're right. I mean, during the period of British colonial rule in India, Chandragupta's story, it was kind of recast, right?
Exactly.
He became like this symbol of Indian resistance against foreign powers.
Yes.
And that encounter with Seleucus, which, who knows, might have been a mix of diplomacy and military maneuvering, that was often simplified into this, heroic victory against a foreign invader.
Exactly.
It's almost like history was mirroring the present. India, struggling under colonial rule, they found solace and inspiration in this figure from their past, a leader who had supposedly repelled a foreign power, centuries earlier.
It's a powerful example of how history can be reinterpreted to, serve the needs of the present.
For sure.
And this reinterpretation wasn't confined to, academic circles either.
Really?
No, it spilled onto the stages and screens of early 20th century India.
So you're talking like plays and films.
Yeah.
They were directly using his story to promote nationalist sentiment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
Take, for example, the play Chandragupta by D.L. Roy, written around 1911.
Okay.
It very explicitly drew parallels between Chandragupta's, supposed victory over Seleucus and India's own struggle for independence from the British.
Okay.
It was a huge success.
Wow.
And it really helped cement this image of Chandragupta as a symbol of resistance.
So the stage was set for him to become this national icon. But how did early Indian cinema portray him? Did films use the same, imagery and messaging?
They actually went even further.
How so?
Well, films had the power to reach a way wider audience.
That's true.
And they definitely weren't afraid to use that power to, promote nationalist ideas. A great example is the South Indian film Mathrubhumi, which used Chandragupta's story as a backdrop for patriotic songs and themes.
I see.
And it actually ended up being temporarily banned by the British authorities for being too inflammatory.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it really shows the influence of art and storytelling.
It does.
So we see this surge in Chandragupta's popularity kind of leading up to India's independence in 1947. But then, what happens after that momentous event?
Right. Does he just fade into the background once that political objective is achieved?
It's interesting how his story actually evolves after independence.
Okay.
So while the intense focus on his victory over Seleucus, that kind of subsides,
Yeah.
he doesn't disappear entirely.
Is he still around?
Yeah, he starts to pop up in TV series, novels, even comics and video games.
Interesting.
And the emphasis shifts a little from military conquest to a more nuanced view,
Okay.
Focusing more on his internal rule, the kind of complexities of statecraft, his personal life.
So it becomes less about the warrior king and more about the multifaceted leader.
Precisely.
It's almost like it mirrors how modern India itself was grappling with its own identity and challenges in that post-independence era.
Right, exactly. It shows how a nation's understanding of its own history can change as it, goes through different phases.
For sure.
And while we still don't have any concrete visual evidence of what Chandragupta actually looked like, no statues or paintings from his time,
Right.
modern artists now have more creative freedom in how they depict him.
So it's that blank canvas again, ready to be filled with the aspirations and interpretations of each generation.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But how exactly is he? How is Chandragupta being visualized in modern India?
Take a look at this recent postage stamp issued by the Indian government. It depicts Chandragupta sitting on this like majestic lion throne surrounded by all these symbols of power and authority.
I see. So it's a far cry from that shadowy, almost mythical figure we find in those ancient texts, right?
Exactly.
He's become like this, you know, fully fledged national hero, his image carefully crafted to inspire and unify. But it makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All these interpretations, all these different versions of Chandragupta, and yet we're still dealing with a lot of gaps in his story. Do those missing pieces actually make him more powerful as a symbol?
It's a paradox, isn't it? The fact that we have to kind of fill in the blanks makes him more adaptable, more malleable to fit different needs and aspirations. And that leads to a bigger question. What does this say about our relationship with history in general?
Yeah, it's almost as if, like, the less we know for certain, the more powerful a figure like Chandragupta becomes. It makes you wonder, are we really learning about the past, or are we just kind of using it to tell ourselves the stories we want to hear?
It's a really interesting question to think about. And this tendency to kind of fill in historical gaps, it's not unique to Chandragupta. It's something we do all the time, often without even realizing it. We look to the past for answers, for inspiration, even to kind of validate our own beliefs. We want history to make sense to us, even if that means, smoothing over the rough edges, maybe embellishing a few
Right,
details.
it's like we're searching for, like, a usable past, not just a collection of, like, facts and dates. But how can we be more critical, I guess, readers of history? Like, how do we appreciate those compelling narratives without getting swept up in, like, potentially biased interpretations?
Well, I think a good place to start is by just acknowledging that history is never truly objective.
Hmm.
Every account, every interpretation, it's always filtered through the lens of the author's own time, their culture,
Hmm.
their own personal values, right?
So it's like acknowledging that every story has a storyteller, and that storyteller has their own, like, baggage, their own perspective that kind of shapes how they see the world and how they present, the past to us.
Exactly. Yeah. And once we understand that, I think we can start to kind of peel back the layers and start asking those critical questions like who wrote this? Why did they write this? What were their motivations? What evidence are they using? What might be missing from their account?
It's like we need to become like history detectives. When we're reading or hearing about these historical figures, like we can't just take things at face value. We got to look for the clues,
Yeah.
the inconsistencies, those alternative interpretations.
Yeah, that kind of critical thinking is so essential, especially in today's world where we're just bombarded with information from every direction. I mean, we're constantly being presented with these historical narratives, and they're often packaged as, simple, straightforward truths. But the reality is, history is rarely simple or straightforward. It's messy, it's complex, it's full of contradictions.
Which is what makes it so fascinating to really dig deeper, right? To go beyond just those like surface level narratives and really try to understand like the nuances of the past. So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into the world of Chandragupta Maurya, here's a final thought to ponder. The next time you encounter, some heroic figure from history, ask yourself who made them a hero and why? Like what gaps are being filled in their story? And whose interests are being served by that particular interpretation?
That's a great point to leave our listeners with. Understanding our relationship with history, how we shape it, how it shapes us. It's crucial for, navigating the complexities of our own time. We can't just accept the narratives we're given. We need to question, we need to explore, we need to delve deeper into those layers of the past.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll leave you to, ponder the mysteries and complexities of history. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Remember to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of fascinating historical figures and the hidden stories behind them. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.